settle in and get comfy, because this is an epic story. Because the journey that we've been on is about discovering what is real. And it's about us grappling towards an authentic expression of faith and life. And for us, at the core of who we are as Christians is this one Palestinian Jewish man called Jesus. And this is our story of his story, of why he's so important to us, to you, and to every corner of this universe. And it all began in a cowshed, in a country overrun by an invading army, when a teenage mother gives birth to a son who she calls Jesus. Ancient Israel was a tough place to be in the early years of the first millennium. And to understand this Jesus character, it's vital that we understand the type of place that Israel was. Because the history of ancient Israel isn't just the history of a nation, it's the history of an ideology. An ideology that was battered and bruised after years of being overrun by other nations. This was a nation of people whose identity was tied in with their land, a land that they believed God had given them, a place to call home, where they would act as a model for how good human society could be. They were to become a nation that was known for its generosity, for feeding the hungry and being like a beacon of light to the nations. And while that dream had faltered in many ways, the nation of Israel 2,000 years ago was super expectant. And when Jesus came on the scene as a 30-year-old miracle worker, come carpenter, come preacher, Israel was yet again under an occupying force. The Roman Empire had overtaken and reached this corner of the Mediterranean, and nobody was happy about it. But the Jews had a firm belief that God would rescue them from the Romans, that he would kind of overthrow them and restore Israel to its rightful place. And was it any surprise that during that time there were revolutionaries that appeared wanting to hurry up the process and restore Israel's freedom with their own hands and with violence? These revolutionaries found sympathetic ears, but they were soon crushed by the brutal policies of the Romans. And it was into this context that Jesus appeared on the public scene with a message about freedom and God's kingdom. And people loved it, for a while at least, because Jesus' message was deeper, it was bigger than those that had gone before. He was a guy saying that God would indeed bring a new reality, a new reign, a new freedom to Israel. But it wouldn't stop there. Instead, it would be humanity-wide. Not only that, but Jesus' message was about the restoration of absolutely everything. People and planet, in fact, the entire cosmos was going to be fixed and restored and given freedom. And not just that, but Jesus said that he was going to be the one to achieve all of this. And it was a fresh message. It was a transformative agenda that many people bought into, and yet was seen as dangerous by those in power. And so, like the revolutions that had gone before, it was crushed. And Jesus was killed like the other revolutionaries on a cross. And Jesus, the revolution, was ended. Or so people thought. And for us, there are 4 super significant Jesus events. There's, first of all, his birth. Then there's his life, his death, and something we call his resurrection. So what about Jesus' birth? What's so important about it? We're all born, aren't we? Well, yes, but the significance goes back to what we discussed last time. Because we discovered that God's story is that he is 3 distinct entities. He's Father, Son, and Spirit. And the second entity, the Son, is Jesus. And it's an amazing concept to get your head around. And we call it the Incarnation, which simply means that God became human like us. And it's amazing and wonderful and complex, and it kind of sets the hairs on the back of your neck on end. Like, how does it work? Is Jesus sometimes God and sometimes human? Well, the important thing to remember is that at any given moment, Jesus is 100% God and 100% human. There's a Greek word, hypostasis, and it means that Jesus is at the same time God and human. inseparable. And that's the key thing to remember about this. But whatever the word is that we use to describe it, the really important thing is knowing that the creator of every atom, the creator of every emotion, the creator of you, became a little baby, was born to a mother, and became utterly vulnerable. And that's how far love goes. Because if we know God as a relationship of amazing love, then it kind of makes sense that he would do this. Because presumably God could have fixed the mess of this universe in a whole variety of ways, but he didn't. He decided to become like you and like me to save us and rescue us. And what we have is this marriage of humanity and divinity in Jesus that begins to tear a hole in the universe as God steps in to begin fixing it. And that is the epic story of Jesus' birth. The second important milestone is Jesus' life itself, because as we'll discover as we go on, Jesus came not simply to fix everything, but to actually show us how to live as if the kingdom is already here. So that's why we would say that he had a kingdom lifestyle. He was about living it out, about living those 4 fixed relationships that we discovered last time. It's why he was known to be somebody who loved the unlovable, the people that no one else wanted to love. He loved the outcasts, those that had the deepest of diseases, those that nobody wanted to come near. It's why he forgave people the bad choices they'd made, so that they could have a fresh start with God. It's why he had these big outdoor lectures and intimate chats, because he wanted to teach people like us, that we too could live like him. We could make better choices in our daily lives that were more like the choices of God's fixed reality. And crucially, it's why he did a whole bunch of miracles. Like, imagine that you're God and you despise the diseases that create suffering amongst humans. Wouldn't you want to fix them? Wouldn't you want to release the humans from that suffering? And that's what we see in Jesus' life. Jesus healed people because he knew that God was on the way of getting rid of pain completely, getting rid of death and illness forever. So he began it there, on hillsides in Palestine and in back alleys in Jerusalem. The third significant event in Jesus' life is, ironically, his death. Jesus' message and lifestyle and the miracles he was performing really got up the noses of the occupying powers, and so they colluded to kill him. The Romans had a particularly effective way of getting rid of the revolutionaries, and it was the cross of crucifixion. And the cross has become a universal symbol for Christian faith. And every time we see it, it reminds us of Jesus and the sacrifice that he made. The sacrifice of a man who never did anything wrong. The sacrifice of a man who only ever brought hope and love to people. Every time we see the cross, it reminds us of the sacrifice of a God who allowed the created to kill the creator. And there's tons of different ways, like lenses in which we can see the cross event. But when it gets down to it, it's about God showing that he loved the world so much that he was willing to die for it. And as we keep doing Jesus-y type things, more and more we'll become like him, and will reflect that sacrifice of love that he showed us by dying on the cross on that obscure afternoon in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. So that's the end of the story, right? A revolutionary dies, you can roll the credits. Well, this is when we get to the final super significant event in Jesus' life, with one word: resurrection. And it seems so simple, like somebody dies and then 40 hours later he's brought back to life. And it's so simple, and yet it is so profound. Because if the resurrection hadn't happened, you wouldn't be sitting there. There'd be no Christian faith, there would be no authentic faith. So what's the deal with resurrection? Well, if you were a Jew 2,000 years ago, you would never expect anyone to come back from the dead. When you died, that was it. And with the death of Jesus, the dreams of his followers died with him. And the shock that Jesus' friends were facing at that time was about to get deeper when they went to his tomb 2 days after he'd died. They'd gone to pay homage to the memory of their friend, and they were scandalised to find that the tomb was empty, the body gone. And then there was the ultimate shock, discovering Jesus standing beside them, resurrected, alive again. And over the next few weeks, Jesus appeared to more than 500 people as he hugged them and ate with them. And it is this wonderful thing that we celebrate by way of resurrection. So what's the deal with resurrection? What does it mean? What does it achieve? Well, with the resurrection of Jesus, we have proof that God's promise for the kingdom is actually true. Like, we could spin a story that said that God was this wonderful being who was going to make everything better, that it was full of hope that things would be fixed and that harmony would be restored. But without some kind of proof and down payment, a story is just a story. And what we have with the resurrection of Jesus is the proof that this kingdom story, this fixed reality, is actually happening. Like with Jesus' resurrected body, we actually see a prototype for us and our bodies. Like, if we believe that God promises us a future without death and without pain, then Jesus, as somebody who's come out the other side of death and has been resurrected and brought to life, then we see our future in front of us. And it's not just a prototype for us, but actually a symbol, a prototype for the whole rest of creation, the entire cosmos. Because in Jesus' resurrection, we see the fixed reality that is beginning to enter into this universe. And here, we find the reality of God's fixed future. The promise that God is going to make everything better. We have concrete, bankable hope that it will happen. That one day, God will restore harmony. That one day, all the brokenness will be fixed. That one day, Jesus' story will be our story.